Hello and welcome to the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today we've reached the end. We have made it to the end of the Cubs minor league season. We're at the award show. I'm joined today by Bryan Smith and Greg Zumach. We got the three-headed monster here today. Zumach, I'll kick it to you first. How's it going, man? Been a while since you've been on.
Yeah, it's been a while. No, pretty good. It wasn't the end of the Cubs season that we were hoping, but you know what? There's been a lot of good prospect talk, and obviously there's some other things to cheer for with the AFL kind of coming up. So, yeah, I think it's still a pretty good time to be talking about this.
Bryan, we got minutes before we hopped on the show, PCA was just awarded by Minor League Baseball the Defensive Player of the Year award. We'll get to that later in this episode, I'm sure. But your thoughts on that, especially considering what he's now the 25th best prospect in the system now that he's struggled in his 15 at bats, right?
Right. I was led to believe that he was a bust and that we shouldn't bother talking about him anymore. So, I guess PC who?
Dude, it's been wild how quickly people have been like, the dude just can't hit. It's like, oh my God, everybody chill out just a little bit, chill out, please.
Yeah, it's almost like I don't envy the people that are going to put up prospect rankings real quick to the end of the season here, because like the Cubs fans that are coming off this month and like the recency bias of being like, you don't have Canario over PCA is going to be like, and those are going to be tough questions for those people to deal with. That's why I'm gonna, let everyone chill out for a couple months and put out those rankings in January, February is my approach to the whole thing.
That's probably a wise move. So today I mentioned the award show. Today is the big award show. It's the first that we've had on this version of the podcast of Cubs on Deck. Me and Jimmy used to host a yearly award show at the end of the season, dating back to our other show. And honestly, it was always one of my favorite shows to put together. We have 18 different awards to hand out today, so we'll churn through these pretty quickly. We have 18 awards to hand out, ranging from Hitter of the Year, all the way down to some wonky ones given out to guys that are most like Sean Barry and Javier Assad, all the way to some superlatives like best fastball, fastest runner, stuff like that. So we've got a whole host of different things to go through here. What we're not going to do on this episode is we're not going to come to the conclusion of the Cubs on Deck award and give the award to one player for every category. There might be a category that's only one player wins. We're all in agreement, but we're also not going to contradict each other to the point just because we want to. So it'll be interesting to see who we come up with here. And do I need to preface it with anything else here, boys?
Well, I guess the only question I have is, do we want to consider major league performance into guys' seasons as we talk about it? You know what I mean? Like, is Miguel Amaya's season considered, like, is he a prospect or a minor leaguer for the purpose of this discussion, or are we going just what guys did on the farm itself?
I think if you are still a rookie,
okay,
like if you still have rookie eligibility, I would say yes.
So Amaya's out. Luke Little's still in. Is Palencia still in?
I think he's out on service time.
Palencia's out. Okay. So PCA still in. Canario's still in. The Jordan Wicks is still in. That's still an option. I think that covers it, right? That's the gist of it all. So they still have prospect status. If they can still appear on your list this January, Bryan, then they're game.
Sounds good.
All right, so I'm not going to save the biggest one for last year. We're just going to get right to it right off the bat. We're going to talk about Hitter of the Year. And in my eyes, I don't know about how you guys feel, it's down to basically two guys. It's kind of a two-headed race here for Hitter of the Year award. Bryan, on this one, I'll kick it to you first. Who is your Cubs minor league Hitter of the Year?
So I'm going to disagree with you. I'm going to say it's a three-headed race, and we can talk about that third guy because I don't know that he'll win the award. But I'm going to go with Owen Casey. I think what Owen did this year in a league that really skewed towards pitchers for the first half was pretty amazing, and just the steps forward that he took in a bunch of parts of his game. He started to access his power. Started to take a lot of those balls that he was hitting towards the left center gap and took them to right center for home runs instead, which was a huge development for him for the long term. Continued to walk at a super high rate. I think maybe the highest rate that he had in a full season league. So took a step forward there. Improved the strikeout rate after the ball change in July. Just a guy that was very clear early on was a better player than he was last year, and then was the rare minor league example of a guy who had 500 plate appearances and seemed to not really have a fall off for more than, I don't know, maybe 8 games at one point.
Yeah, he had just about as good of a season as we could have hoped coming into the year. Did Owen Casey. Greg, are you in agreement with Bryan there?
Well, I mean, I'm a little frustrated because I sent that exact passage and Bryan read it verbatim. That was my answer. Now, yeah, I would echo all the things that Bryan said. I think that Owen Casey was my pick. I do think it's not a runaway. And while I could see all three of us, I don't really know, choosing Owen Casey, I don't think it was a runaway. I think that Moises Ballesteros stood out to me as well. I'm curious who that third one is for Bryan, because I got to admit, like, I don't want to just pull the recency bias card, but I think you can't help but be impressed at what Matt Shaw did to force his way up all the way to Double-A and to be very successful at that level.
Sure.
Like, that is that not in a major way, but somewhat alters some of the trajectory and some of the conversations that I think the organization is having this winter. So that one is at least a third for me, but I am curious, first of all, who Greg is going to pick, and then who Bryan's got for a 3.
Yeah, I won't change it up. Owen Casey's my pick too. So we're gonna start off this show with a clean sweep of the hitter of the year award. I'll echo everything you guys have been saying. I mean, I think that it is, for me, for Owen Casey, it's not only did he take that jump in the power department that we really wanted to see, but I've kind of said all year that I thought his outfield defense was greatly improved over last year. I think he looked more athletic on the base paths, which is like those two things did not make him win this award for me. But I think it's worth pointing out those two things improved pretty significantly. And then also, it's kind of underrated. Owen Casey batted 289 this year. he had a really good batting average in addition to the home run power that he put up. So yeah, Owen Casey is my winner, but I'm with you guys. Moises Ballesteros is my number 2. I think that him being 19 years old, going up to Double-A, putting up the numbers he did in the Carolina League, up to South Bend, up to Tennessee, is really impressive. Those two guys, those are 1 and 2 in a 400 plate appearance sample size. Those are 1 and 2 in my bash metric in terms of offensive performance this year. Number 1 is actually Jefferson Rojas, less plate appearances. But yeah, Bryan, who's your third guy?
Yeah, I actually think that I would vote this guy second. So there's a guy that we have yet to discuss who reached base 1 more time than Owen Casey, had 1 more RBI than Owen Casey, had 11 more extra base hits, 1 more home run, had 23 more runs scored. Jonathan Perlaza had 100 runs scored this year, 40 doubles, 65 extra base hits. Just an absolutely absurd season from Perlaza. And I mean, the on base streak, I don't know if you guys remember the exact number, but it was basically like 1,000 games in a row he reached base or something like that. So I think he has. I think if you just showed 2 people just the numbers alone, the raw numbers, they would say player A, Jonathan Perlaza, is the player of the year.
Yeah, that's a good call. that's a good call. Honestly, like I think that he has every. I think it's a 3-headed race. I take back my comment. You nailed it. All right, let's go ahead and go on to starting pitcher of the year, which I think this might also be a clean sweep. Is anybody out there in disagreement that Cade Horton is the pitcher of the year in the system? No thoughts on it actually being Cam Sanders.
It is not a 3-horse race. No, it's a 1-horse race.
I think that Cade Horton, it's funny because I know that we did our like mini award shows recently in the past couple of weeks with BK and with Sam on South Bend and Myrtle Beach. And I don't think Cade got a vote on either of those mini award shows, right? Because he got so little time in comparison to the other pitchers there, because he just kept climbing the ladder. Overall, the number, every single number he put up is just absolutely ridiculous. Let me read off a few of these. He went 88 and a third innings between low A, high A, and double A. He had a 2.65 ERA, a 1.00 WHIP. He struck out almost 34% of the batters he faced and only walked 7%. He had the best CSW in the system.
And those numbers get better if you include playoffs, but
and then
by like a good bit.
Exactly. Yeah. So every single number across the board, he just kind of blew away the competition. It was everything we could have dreamed from a starting pitcher of the year type season from Cade Horton.
Yeah, and I mean it. Even without the numbers, I think it's what he showed you, right? Like he came into the year with 2 swing and miss pitches, and he left with. I think you can make an argument between 3 or 4 swing and miss pitches. Kind of depends on what he had cooking at that day, but honestly showed you a bit of both with that, kind of split change, and then the curveball was getting really, really good depth down towards the end of the season. It was just really impressive stuff. That was an inspired pick and allowed the Cubs to be really aggressive during the rest of the draft last year. And yeah, can't say enough. Cade Horton, he's a bad man.
I mean, the thing that's just different that you just don't see from minor league pitchers, like you can follow minor league pitchers for 10 years and you're not going to see strikeout to walk to inning. Like that combination of rates that he has is just absolutely absurd. I mean, I know he walked a few more in double A. Like, I mean, if you took the numbers just in A ball, what strikeouts to walks was crazy. And then, he more than held his own at double A, even by walking a few more hitters. Yeah, just a guy who was in total command, never panicking on the mound, just better than everyone he faced this year, it seemed like.
It's been a really kind of rough, couple weeks for Cubs fans. So I'll pose this question because I think I know where I'm going with it. Cade Horton's the best Cubs pitching prospect since
Mark Prior.
Yeah, I think so too.
Pretty clearly since Mark Prior. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I saw somebody recently kind of posting about how it's great to have a top 100 pitching prospect, a consensus top 100 pitching prospect, and it's like it is great. We haven't had something like this literally since Mark Prior. It's like it's understating it, being just happy that we have a top 100 guy, based on how good Cade Horton is. I mean, arguably the best right-handed pitcher in minor league baseball. The minor league baseball award show on MLB Network is happening right now, and he's one of the finalists for pitcher of the year. I don't know when they're announcing that, but he might win that. He was one of the finalists for breakout player of the year. I know he lost that over Junior Caminero, but I like it. It's wild what he did this year. So I don't really have anything else to say about Cade. It was an absolutely incredible year.
Yep,
totally. And actually, I'm just going to say that Ben Brown was like midway into the season was on pace to maybe threaten to win this award. Actually, I think still led the system in strikeouts. Like really good season that we would have been happy to hype up. Had sort of just one stretch that didn't go great, but a worthy probably number 2, maybe Jordan Wicks, but it's a different tier than where Cade was.
I mean, any other year that we don't have Cade Horton, if you were to plop Ben Brown into the 2021 season, we'd be losing our minds at that, right?
Yep.
Because we hadn't had that in ages. So, yeah, no, it was a really good year for Ben Brown. We just saw Cade Horton go, supernova.
Yeah. Let's go on to a different category, and this award goes to the Reliever of the Year award. This is interesting because I've said this on the show several times that, at least for me, the most difficult players to analyze are relievers in the organization, because you're locked into what the starting pitchers are doing. You're locked into whatever good offense is going on. A lot of times it was Tennessee this year. A lot of times the relievers are hard to follow and hard to pay attention to in games. So you just lock onto a few guys that or you just follow the stats and follow the box scores really, really closely. This Reliever of the Year award, I think, comes down to a few guys. I'll kick it to Zumach first on this one. Who is your pick for Cubs Reliever of the Year?
He actually started as a starter started as a starter. He began the season as a starter. He finished in the pen, in the Wrigley pen. I just have to go with Luke Little. I think that there are a couple really good options here, but it's really hard to argue seeing what that major league like front line or back end of the pen type of stuff looked like at the major league level at AAA. I saw him when he was out in Omaha as well. It was really hard to miss, and so he's my reliever of the year.
Yeah, Brian, you got any rebuttals on that?
No, I think when you're considering minor league awards, I think you have to give extra credit when a guy jumps a level. And when a guy jumps 4 levels, that's like, that's like when you have the 100% on the test and then your teacher still gives you like 8 points of extra credit. It's like, well, what is this serving anybody at this point? Yeah, I mean, Luke, just an awesome season. Like a guy that just no hitter this season looked comfortable against him. And I know there was a ton of frustration about David Ross in the final 6 weeks as it came to young players. Honestly, the only young player usage that really bothered me was Luke's, because I really do feel like there were some spots where he was probably the best man available. And I hope that he did enough to make the Cubs feel comfortable that he can help them next season, like out of the gate. At least, maybe he has to win a job in spring training, and I'm fine with that. But give him a clear path to do it, because the trajectory he's on is a guy that can help the pen here for 5 years.
Luke Little's my pick. 63 2/3 innings in the minor leagues, 2.12 ERA, struck out almost 38% of the batters he faced. Walked maybe a few too many guys, but when you're striking out 38, it does not matter. You're right. That bat looks just so uncomfortable. I think that it's. I was not expecting us to go clean sweep on all three of these main categories here. I think that in my eyes, there's a clear cut number 2 with Frankie Scalzo, and I'd do everything in my power to give that award to him, but I just can't when Luke Little put up the numbers that he did this year, and especially out of the bullpen when he was converted, when he was sent down to Arizona for a week, right, to do that conversion from starting to relieving. When he came back up, he was assigned immediately to Double-A, and he just took off as a reliever.
Wait, I can't remember. Actually, did Little go down to Arizona, or did he go right to Double-A?
I thought
or he pitched one side of the pen and then he went right to Double-A. Palencia did.
Yeah.
I know he did.
I believe it was he just pitched once in South Bend and then right to Double-A.
Yeah,
you're right. Which is
that's
maybe
crazy.
even more wild.
I mean, this Little allowed a 227 slugging percentage this year, including his stint in the majors. I mean, that's a whole nother world.
If I remember right, he did not give up an extra base hit to a lefty all year long.
One in the majors. He gave up a double in the majors. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was the first, like his first outing, wasn't it? Or second outing.
I think it was the second.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I mean, that I was talking to somebody today. I was like, if you could not pay me enough money to get in the box as a lefty against Luke Little, like I wouldn't do it. Like you couldn't pay me to do that, man. Yep. It's wild.
Would you go fight a lion? I mean, like, no, like I don't. No, thank you.
So we got a clean sweep here of the main 3 awards. We get to get a little bit not weird yet, but let's go ahead and transition to breakout player of the year. This might also be a clean sweep. I'll kick it to Brian first because it feels appropriate to do so. Unless it's not, unless you're going off book here.
I kind of want to be weird and go off book. You know what? I think I am, because the guy that Greg's going to talk about in a minute, I think his breakout actually happened in the instructional league in September, exactly a year ago. So on a pure technicality, I'm going to go with Michael Arias. Okay. Because that's a guy that to me showed up this year way more on the fringe of the Cubs organization radar. And, that changeup was like, I mean, this was a system that had good changeups. I mean, you had Jordan Wicks and Cole Franklin in the system, and there were days where Michael's changeup was the best in the system. Not to mention that he reached back for 100 a handful of times, and just a really awesome year. I know he got to high A and he got his, he got kicked in the face a little bit there, but I think that's going to be good for him in the long run. And just a sort of like career redefining couple months for him, and I'm gonna give the award to him.
Yeah,
he is Rule 5 eligible. Does he get added?
I think so, but I'm not very confident. I think it's like 66% yes.
He seems like the most. We're not gonna get into this, but he seems like the most likely of the potential guys added, right?
I agree.
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth on that a little bit, but yeah, I think that's a really good argument. He fits the profile of somebody that you could just plop in the pen. So really quick on Arias, because we can share this. This isn't like behind the scenes information on our 1060 West Discord channel. Matt Thompson of Prospects Live is awesome, and he'll occasionally drop some nuggets in there. And one of the nuggets that he dropped is that they've talked to teams who have what would be a future value grade of a 60 overall on Michael Arias. So that kind of poses the question of, would he get plopped in the Rule 5? Probably. Right. If some team wants to roll the dice that's a plus player already graded out. I don't know how the Cubs feel about him, but they have to be pretty impressed.
I'll go real quick before kicking it back to you, Greg, for breakout player. I am going to go with Brian's guy, Jefferson Rojas. Dude, that was such a nerdy way about avoiding picking Jefferson Rojas. It was terrific. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's if your name wasn't Bryan Smith, you might not have ever heard of Jefferson Rojas entering this year, and now he is pretty clearly he's right around that top 10 in the organization. I think depending on who you talk to, he's a top 5 guy. Some people drop him just outside of top 10, but he's a top 10 prospect as far for all intents and purposes in this organization. And to go from one extreme to the other, I think that Arias is actually a great pick. I think that if you don't have a guy like Jefferson Rojas going crazy, I would absolutely pick Michael Arias. Those are two guys that went from firmly off the radar to firmly on the radar. And that defines a breakout player in my eyes. So, Zumach, who you got?
I think Rojas is a great pick. I think Arias is a great pick. I'm actually going to go a little bit off book here, and I'm going to go with Ballesteros. I mean, this is a guy that went from out of all these players that we've talked about here, Ballesteros is one that has garnered some national chatter and some national talk. We even had Kylie McDaniel casually toss out that he said that they've talked to teams that have him as potentially a top 50 overall prospect. I think some of that heat may have fallen off a little bit because there's some questions as whether he's actually a catcher. But you know what? The bat's playing, and at 19, making it up all the way to AA and really holding some pretty competitive at-bats, I think is really, really impressive.
Yeah, that's a good pick too. It's kind of a category that we went from being a clean sweep to 3 different answers, and all 3, I think if we were to make a poll, like put a poll out there, whether it's on Twitter or whatever, and say like, who is your breakout pick, which we might end up doing, I think that it would be pretty close to a 1/3 vote for all 3 of these guys, considering the years they had and how they've jumped up. Yeah, I think like when you're talking about Rojas and Arias, and going from a guy that's off the radar on the radar, the one time that can be competed against for breakout player is when you're going from on the radar to top 100 guy, borderline top 100 guy. And I think Ballesteros getting that love is worthy of that category here for sure. All right, next category, comeback player of the year award. So, the way I envision this and the way we kind of talked about it on past episodes here is just kind of you can frame this however you want. Whether it was a guy that was really bad last year and came back and was really strong this year, was out with an injury, kind of like the comeback player of the year award is for Major League Baseball, right? I'll go ahead and lead this one off this time. I haven't led one off. For my pick for comeback player of the year, I'm gonna go with Cohen Moreno. I think here. I was down between 2 dudes, and I think that obviously there's a lot of peripheral stats that I don't love with Cohen Moreno. I think that you look at some of the walk rates that are outrageously high, but when it comes down to it, we talked about it a lot on last week's show with Sam about how he performed in a lot of different roles, and the ERA was top 10 in the organization. And if you would have told me before the season that Cohen Moreno would have a top 10 ERA in the organization, I might have laughed at you a little bit. So I think that he put himself back on the map where he was right after the draft. And for that, he is my comeback player of the year. Zumach, what you think?
I'm not sure if this other person is the one you're going to talk about, but I think in both where he was just in previous years and also literally making a comeback in the middle of the year, Christian Franklin is like,
you got my pick.
This is the Phoenix rising from the ashes. Like, he had these fluky injuries and went from a guy that I had ranked as a second round pick that Cubs got for slot in the fourth, and then had fluky injuries, effectively lost the whole season. And really the first half of the year did not look great. I'm very curious what happened with the development listed, because
I gotta know, man. Yeah.
Promote whoever was the one making those changes. And really, I also want to give credit, obviously, to Christian Franklin. Like, so many guys could have just been like, just so down in the dumps that with how everything turned out. The man earned, as of today, an Arizona Fall League stint. So kudos to you, Christian Franklin. You are definitely my comeback player of the year.
Yeah, I would go with Franklin too. If people aren't familiar, like, first game of minor league spring training in 2022, Franklin tore his knee, missed the entire season. So part of the story, like Greg said, is coming back from that so well. But the other part of it is that he was out of sorts coming into the year at the beginning of the season, and then came back within the season as well. And now a guy who I think is probably a top 25 prospect in the system, and is every bit, I think, in the same place or even higher on the radar than he was when he was drafted. So whatever dip it was, I think he's back, and it was really cool to see that really, really great 6 weeks he had towards the end of the summer.
You guys convinced me. I would change my pick if I didn't go first. The other guy I want to give a shout out to is Rayvaj Garcia, who we talked again about on last week's episode.
Yeah, that's good.
Just that he fits where Rayvaj was probably not too far. I'll say this: I don't have any knowledge of this, obviously, but I can't imagine he was too far off from being a release candidate at some point this year, right? I mean, he's been in the organization for a long time and never performed all that well, put up not great numbers, So
yeah.
I think that for him to bounce back, and according to, I think, what both you, Brian, and Sam last week on last week's show, the Myrtle Beach Pelicans MVP this year. So that's big too.
Yeah.
All right, let's get a little fun. Let's talk about the most fun player to watch this season. And this is entirely like whatever you guys enjoy. It can be pitching. It's a fun pitcher that you enjoy watching. A guy that just put up the best numbers and that's fun in your eyes, or just like he plays the game in a fun way. I want to hear what you guys think as far as who the most fun player to watch in the organization was this year. Brian, I'll kick it to you first.
Man, this is tough. So, I'm going to give my honorable mention before I give my award. My honorable mention is Cam Sanders, who I think, like, when Cam Sanders leaves the organization, like, we're changing this award to like the Cam Sanders Award, because Cam is just the most fun pitcher / player to watch that I've ever seen. Just, the K struts, the just absolute swag on the mound it's out of control. But it's Pete Crow-Armstrong's world, and we're all living in it. And it's like, it's so hard to pick anything else. I mean, the celebrations when he does something good at the bases, the outrageous catches in the field, just the general energy he plays with, and the way that he fires up his teammates. It's really, really cool when not only is your top prospect insanely talented, but he's also just a guy that you want to go to war for. And that's PCA for me.
You know how I led this off by saying, maybe it's a guy who's just the best player and it's fun watching the best player, or it's a guy who's really fun and you just like watching a fun player. PCA is both. That's why he's my vote too.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, dude. It's not only is he good, but the way that he's good, the style in which he plays, crashing into outfield walls, which gives me anxiety sometimes, but it's fun as hell to watch, and flying across the outfield, flying on the bases, making some stupid outs on the bases. But man, it's terrific to watch, even if he's making outs. The beating out infield base hits, going crazy when he scores. It's PCA is my pick, and I think that it's to me PCA is the dude. He's that dude. So fun to watch. He's the reason why he's going to be every fan's favorite player in Chicago for years to come.
Yep.
I mean, what's the obvious shirt that they used to have, which is Javi Baez is your favorite player's favorite player? And I mean, there's a reason that in the 2020 draft, when they interviewed Pete Crow-Armstrong, he said that Javi Baez was his favorite baseball player. And of course, it's crazy that they got traded and there's a bunch of different corollaries in their career. But I mean, PCA is basically Javi with a better approach, I would say. I'm going to toss out another name here that PCA is absolutely a great answer. But if we fast forward even a year, we may be talking about this guy as a clean sweep, and that's Kevin Alcantara. Who plays with an insane amount of flair. He is unbelievably fun. He is also one of the best players. He could be the number one prospect in this system next year. I just think Kevin Alcantara, Jaguar's going to hunt, and I think he's just very fun as well.
If you give yourself a nickname, then you automatically get extra points in terms of being a fun guy to watch. If you name yourself El Jaguar, like that's I love it. I love it. All right, guys. From most fun player to watch this year to a similar award, we're gonna go with the player you are most excited to watch next year. So this can be for other reasons, right? This doesn't necessarily mean the most like Kevin Alcantara is the most fun to watch. This is the player you're most excited to see what he does in the organization in 2024. Want me to lead off on this one here?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to go with Jackson Ferris as my pick here. I think that what he did this year, while we've hyped it up quite a bit, I think it still went overshadowed a little bit by the performance of Cade Horton. We talked about it earlier, right? We mentioned like Ben Brown might have gotten some more buzz if Cade Horton did for pitcher of the year. If Cade Horton didn't do what he did, Jackson Ferris is the same way, right? For him to be a 20-year-old next year in South Bend, like I'm really, really excited to see what he can do and how he takes off and if he eats more innings. And it's just like, to me, I'm just so curious to see what he comes out and does next year. And Jackson Ferris is my pick here for sure. Brian, what you got?
All right, so I'm going to go with a guy who was drafted this year. So because I haven't seen this guy play in streamed games yet. I haven't seen him play in person. But the little bits, the clips, the general sort of like build, the YouTube videos, like Zaire Hope, I am so intrigued by just as a baseball player. He played really well in the Arizona Complex League for a guy with his experience level. Has seemed to do very well in the instructional league. If you're reading Arizona Phil's reports at the Cub Report, it seems like Zaire's, one of the names that he sort of mentions in that intro paragraph, like every single game.
Yeah.
I think he's gonna be in Myrtle Beach next year. Pretty close to home for him. Obviously, a hard place for a hitter to hit, but like that's a guy that you can see a top 100 prospect in there. Yes. If you watch that swing and you see that body, that's like, okay, that could be a top 100 prospect. If the Cubs got that on day 3, that's so exciting. I can't wait to watch him, 200 at bats next year and really start to like have a handle on who he is as a player.
I like it. I'm going to toss out another young guy that the stuff is absolutely legit. Drew Gray. Yeah. I think he is some work that he needs to do to refine his control. But man, the stuff is legit. And frankly, there were people that were really, really down in the dumps when he went down with Tommy John. I mean, there were some pretty wild comps that got put out there. Basically, like we lost our chance at our Harrison, like Kyle Harrison, effectively talking about a guy who came in the year after he was drafted out of high school and just like soared up levels and looked like a frontline guy. Control's usually the last thing to come back after you recover from Tommy John. I'm kind of talking in generalities there, but it wouldn't surprise me to see Drew Gray really lock it in next year.
I think they really started to give Drew the playbook for what Justin Steele did with his fastball.
Yep.
And I think if you watched him towards the end of the year, he's so much more on the side of the baseball. He's a guy who always had huge spin rates on his fastball. But what they did with Justin was essentially they traded some of the life he had, some of the, vertical movement for horizontal cut. I think that they're starting to try that with Drew. And if it takes, and he comes into next year sort of with a Justin Steele fastball to go with all the other sort of gifts he has, it's going to be a really exciting rise.
Isn't it awesome that we have a guy in our organization that you can just point to be like, look, he is wildly successful. Go be like him. Like that's fun. That's fun in itself. All right, guys, let's go to another category that is pretty open-ended here. We're going to go with biggest surprise this year. This can be an individual player. This can be just something that happened. I can lead this because it's so open-ended. I can lead this one off and kind of give you guys a little bit of guidance here. I'm going to go with the quick return and the quick return of Alexander Canario, because coming off that injury, I mean, we talked about it a lot on this podcast. Coming off that injury last year and over in the offseason, and to come back as quickly as he did and make his way up to AAA Iowa and then get his MLB debut is downright ridiculous. Like that, it's wild. Obviously, we found out today, recording this on Monday, we found out that he will not be going down to the Arizona Fall League, and that he will likely be showing up in winter leagues this offseason. So that's really fun in itself too. So it's just like I did not expect this quick of a return, and the Cubs, I guess more so the Cubs, to feel that comfortable pulling him up to the major league level. We can talk about his usage at the major league level, all that good stuff, but we won't. Just the fact that the Cubs had confidence to bring him up not too far removed from this injury is pretty ridiculous, and it surprised the heck out of me.
That's a good pick. I think for my pick, I'm going to go with Luis Vasquez. Hit 20 home runs this season.
Yeah, nice.
This is a guy that hit 9 home runs in 2022, and that was surprising because he'd never hit more than 3 in a season. So we're more than doubling the previous career high, but we're like 6xing where he was 2 years ago as a player, which is absurd. And 80 RBIs, just another just ridiculous number for a guy that is like sort of that classic prospect where you're like all field, no bat, shortstop that gets to AAA and it just like sort of stalls out. Like he put in a lot of work to get stronger over the last couple of years, but last year it was there and it didn't really take. He had a really bad end of the season, played bad in winter ball. Like it was looking like this was his last year in the Cubs organization. And he flipped the script completely. And now we're having, 40-man conversations about him. And it was really cool. And it felt like one of those things where it was like, this isn't going to keep going. This isn't going to keep going. And it kept going every month. It was really cool.
Zumach, your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways I could go around with this. I'll just toss out that I didn't think that the Cubs would be as aggressive in their promotions. And I know I'm like just lumping a bunch of stuff together, but there's a lot of guys that I'm like, oh wow, like the Cubs of a couple years ago would not have promoted them. Cade Horton's probably finishing the year in South Bend. Moises Ballesteros is not in Double A. I mean, I don't think James Tarantos is in Double A.
Matt Shaw, yeah.
Like I just and kudos to the players for forcing the issue, but like there's a lot of guys that I think they're all down a level with previous. So if anything, maybe the Cubs organization for being willing to roll the dice on some guys and see what they can show at a level higher, which to be fair is, I think, a trend baseball wide. There were if I had to guess right now, this is a lot broader conversation, but in response to the cuts to 165 active next year, I think that's what the issue is.
I'll piggyback off that a little bit and say that like it was surprising, like having Daniel Palencia and Luke Little up in Chicago this year. That wouldn't have happened in years past, I don't think. So and that included a conversion to the bullpen this
Yep.
year. Like that happened this year, and that could be lumped in with all this too. The not having that hesitancy that they had in years past to convert guys to the bullpen, the Palencias, the Littles, the Ryan Jensen, Porter Hodge, guys like that. They pulled the trigger on that. If they viewed them as a reliever or whatever, they pulled that trigger. That was a lot faster than past years. So yeah, it's just been a lot different looking in terms of all of that type of work behind the scenes. All right. Let's go to the major league roster. We had this conversation right off the bat is who is eligible to be talked about in these different award categories. Let's talk about Chicago Cubs Rookie of the Year, the best debut. This can be your Miguel Amaya's or your Daniel Palencia's. Brian, who is your Rookie of the Year for the Cubs?
Yeah, I think I have to go with Jordan Wicks because Jordan came into a situation, that I don't think anybody was expecting, including him, for him to walk into it. A spot in the Cubs rotation opened up because of an injury and because Drew Smyly was really struggling. And, the Cubs said, like, we need somebody to plug a hole here. We need someone to stop the bleeding a little bit. And Jordan came up and was just so competent, from that first start against the Pirates, against the Reds the next time, he just belonged in the major leagues. He belonged in a playoff race. And that just, I think that just means so much. I think he's a guy that just seemed to win himself a spot for next year. And that's, I think, what you're asking a rookie to do.
Yeah, it's a great call. And honestly, it's hard to argue with Jordan Wicks here. I am going to go Miguel Maya because if there's anything that this Cubs organization over the past probably 10 years has shown, they do not love handing the reins at catcher to a young guy. I mean, they begrudgingly did it with Contreras and even then had 2 other catchers on the roster. The Cubs actually made the decision to move from 3 catchers to 2 and effectively hand the reins a little bit to Miguel Amaya. Now, I know he didn't play a bunch down the stretch, and that's a whole other thing, but he still was the backup catcher for a team that absolutely had October aspirations. So I just think, especially with everything that, we talk about comeback player of the year. I know he's probably wasn't eligible, but Miguel Amaya, man,
yeah,
what he's come back to do it's franchise changing.
Yeah. So I came into this episode down between those two guys, down between Jordan Wicks and Miguel Amaya for this pick. Both guys, according to Baseball Reference, finished with a 0.3 WAR on the season. Obviously, Jordan Wicks came up a lot or far after Miguel Amaya was up. I think I'm going to go Miguel Amaya here.
That's right, Brian. That's right.
I think I'm going.
I thought he was going to go Matt Mervis in the end.
Well, honestly, it's kind of shocking I didn't go with Jordan Wicks. But no, I think that Jordan Wicks is absolutely deserving based on the scenario that he came up and the how reliant the Cubs were on him to succeed as soon as he came up. But Miguel Amaya, I think that it helps that he probably deserves a little bit of extra love here for that kind of comeback player, that type of situation.
Yeah.
I just think it's so valuable to have him as a catcher. And with Yan Gomes' option likely being picked up for next year, you have one more year to be eased into it even more as a starting catcher, right? I think that next year, while this year it was a lot of clearly the number 3 and then a distant number 2 catcher, I think next year in 2024, we see more of a split, probably still leaning Yan Gomes unless he really struggles, but more of a split, setting up for Miguel Amaya to be the guy in 2025. And that's valuable more than what you can describe in WAR. And I think the fact that pitchers seem to feel comfortable even at the major league level throwing to him, we've heard nothing but good things from the coaching staff and his teammates and stuff like that. I just think that he might not always win this rookie of the year on paper compared to Jordan Wicks and the performance that he put up, but it feels really good what Miguel Amaya did this year, man. I really like it, especially considering how high we were on him in past years, and now he's back, and it makes me really happy. Honestly, it makes me really happy that Miguel Amaya did what he did this season.
The other thing he did that doesn't show up in a stat sheet is, he was competent enough that the organization was comfortable to release Tucker Barnhart. And, that's opening a 40-man spot that a guy like Jordan Wicks only gets because the Cubs are comfortable opening a spot for him, right? And so that's something that if you told me before the year, like, not only does Miguel Amaya make the major leagues, but he's so solid that they release one of the veteran catchers to give him more of an opportunity. No way was that going to happen.
And the Cubs feel confident enough to not give him everyday plate appearances, right? Like he's coming off several missed seasons because of injury. The easy thing would have been, hey, let's keep him in Iowa, have him playing almost every day, and just get those reps up. And they felt confident enough, like, hey, this guy is good enough to be on this major league roster. Like we need him here. We need him to be in Chicago. So
and the other thing too is that I think that Miguel Amaya, and this is not to be taking shots at Wilson Contreras or anything, but in many ways, Miguel Amaya is the type of catcher that the Cubs have always gravitated towards. I mean, I think Wilson kind of dropped in their lap through some hard work, and they almost didn't know what gift they even had in him. But Miguel Amaya incorporates those soft skills that they are consistently going to in contention seasons. So, you've got the young Gomes. I mean, even though Tucker Barnhart wasn't good offensively, he had all those soft skills. David Ross, Miggy Montero. I mean, all of these catchers are the type of catchers that a Epstein, Hoyer, Hawkins type organization has gone towards. And Miguel Amaya showed enough of those intangible things that WAR really, truly can't capture.
You guys ready to get weird?
Let's do it.
Weirder.
All right, let's get weird. So we're going to do the Sean Barry most talked about guy on the podcast award. So a little bit of background on that. I kept the name because it was just too good of a name to give up. Me and Jimmy, it was our first year doing our Growing Cubs show, doing that podcast. And we spent way too much time talking about Sean Barry, who by all accounts, had a really great statistical season back in, what was that? That would have been 2019, the 2019 season, I believe it was. And we just spent a lot of time talking about Sean Barry on the podcast. If you guys out there listening don't know who Sean Barry is, go just check out his Baseball Reference, I guess. I don't know. But we handed out an award at the end of the season for Sean Barry as the most talked about guy on the podcast, and the name is just stuck. I think last year we handed out that award to Luke Little, which is kind of looking good now. So this can be a guy that I think it's a guy we just talked about a lot, whether it's he deserved it or not. There's some guys that we just kind of latch onto as prospect guys. I'll probably lead this one off. I'm going to go with Moises Ballesteros. I think that we just talked about him a lot on this show, dude. Like, obviously warranted for Ballesteros more than Sean Barry. No offense, Sean. But Ballesteros really pops on the map. I mean, he was your breakout player of the year, Zumach. So I think that obviously he warranted it, but like it feels like we talked about Moises Ballesteros every single episode. And I think it matches with the hype surrounding him out on Cubs Twitter and out on the 1060 West Discord channel and stuff like that, right? I think that everybody seems to love Mo Baller, and we sure as hell loved him on this show. That's for sure. So I'll kick it to you, Brian. I'll kick it to you first.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the first half of the season feels like 19 years ago, but if we take ourselves back to May, the idea that the Cubs had drafted a guy from a college in Colorado that nobody had ever heard of, that had put up these video game numbers, all of a sudden was plopped in high A and was just absolutely dominating, and then reaches double A. I mean, I think we forget just like how much we on this podcast were talking about Hayden McGeary in May, in April, and June. And then he had just like a super competent season in double A, and we probably didn't talk about him very much in the second half because he just became this familiar just performer in the system, which is so crazy for a guy with his backstory. But just because I think he just dominated discussion early on so much, he's the guy that I think I thought of when I read your description of this award.
That's a good one. Zumach.
See, and I'm actually really surprised you didn't go with this guy, but Frankie Scalzo was who I thought you were literally trying to lead us into here.
That's good.
But I mean, that's the guy that when I pull up the podcast and I listen to, I mean, I think Cole Roeder certainly also
Yeah.
is a worthy dude to consider for it. And both had very good seasons as well. So I don't, but I totally thought you were leading us into Frankie Scalzo.
Honestly, though, I feel like Cole Roeder and Frankie Scalzo might fit this bill a little bit better, considering like they're not like top 30 guys in the organization, you know. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to see who we latch onto. You know, it's interesting to see who like we talk about, even if it's a guy like we talk a lot about Hayden McGarry. Obviously, I'm not nearly as high on Hayden McGarry in terms of prospect list as what most fans are. But we still talk about him a lot on the show because he's a fun guy. Some guys have that quality, whether it's the way in which they play or like the way they popped on the map or whatever it might be. But that's always super interesting to me.
I also want to point out that you said Chase Strumpf's name in every episode this season. So like if it's just times mentioned, Chase Strumpf is like forever the Greg Huss winner of this award.
This is true. Yeah. I feel like it's probably like I just find ways to fit Chase Strumpf in my
really do.
common like conversations in real life. You know, like I'm at work like talking about architecture and they're like, oh, like what does Chase Strumpf think about this? Like it's just I gotta find a way to squeeze him into conversation for sure.
Do you see how this building is so Chase Strumpfian in its majesticness? Like
Exactly. All right, guys, we got another fun category here named after somebody. I like how potentially changing that exciting player, the fun player, to Cam Sanders in years in the future. I named this award after Javier Assad because this is the Javier Assad Award for the guy who has not been ranked but could make an impact in Chicago one day. There's some dudes that, like you and I, like the guys who make our prospect list here. We even kind of identify as like there might be something there, but like I'm also not going to rank him in my top 30. I'm not going to rank him in my top 40. Is there a guy that you, Zumach, have identified as not worthy of a ranking, maybe, but you can see making an impact in Chicago, kind of like what Javier Assad did?
You know, yeah, this one's really, really, really tough. I don't know that I have a great answer here. I do think because it kind of depends on like what a ranking is, like a pipeline top 30 or a Bryan Smith top 108.
Depends on what your definition of is.
Yes, that's right. You know, I guess one of the guys that I think we probably should give a little bit more kudos to is somebody even just like Connor Noland. I also thought about like Nick Hull a little bit. One of these 2022 mid-second day draft picks that, you know, there was just some really strong kind of hype around them from the scouting side. And those are just the guys that just kind of slowly like make it up to the system. And then all of a sudden they're throwing meaningful innings, or they get one pitch that goes from, hey, that was kind of a below average pitch to they're getting some above average grades, and it just completely changes the repertoire. So, you know, Connor Noland was one of the first ones I was thinking about because I already ruled out Brody McCullough and probably Brandon Birdsell as well. But that kind of idea is the first thing I thought of when I read that award.
Brian, who you got?
Yeah, I remember a specific start that a guy had this year that I remember writing it up. He threw 4 perfect innings, struck out 9 hitters, and I wrote the next day that what he showed in that start reminded me of Javier Assad from the year before. So, you know, just because Assad's name is attached to the award, I guess I'm gonna pull Manny Espinosa. Manny, I think if Manny was healthy all year, I think his breakout would have been on people's radars. I think he really broke out this year. I think he was a radically better pitcher than he was in 2022. Added a cutter like Javier Assad did to break out, but you know, also was like 95. I think might have even touched 96 shortly before getting injured. Did come back towards the end of the season. Was on the Smokies roster at the end of the year. So, yeah, I think that's a guy that if he continues on that path, if he has another offseason like he did last year, you know, I think he could. I don't see a reason. There's not a radically huge difference between Javier Assad as a pitcher and certainly the pitcher he was in AA and what Manny Espinosa is now.
Yeah, I think that going the route of a pitcher is a really smart thing to do, considering the pitching infrastructure and how much confidence that we have in the development staff to make the most of these arms in the organization. I'll make it a little more difficult on myself and go the position player route, but I'm gonna go the easiest of the position player route and pick a catcher that's already in Iowa. This feels right to go with Bryce Wyndham. And
I
obviously
love
Bryce
that pick.
Wyndham did not have a stellar offensive performance this year or in years past. But what he does, we've talked. I mean, he might fit the Sean Barry Award here too, considering how much we talked about Bryce Wyndham. I think that he's a guy that obviously he has really good feel to hit, where he'll make contact. The strikeouts will stay low, the walks will stay relatively high. He's just not going to hit for a lot of power. But really, for me, it's the fact that you just talked about a little bit ago, Greg, is that like he has those soft skills the Cubs seem to love. And he just really feels like a guy that could be called up as a backup catcher. He's not destined to be a starting catcher, obviously. But if the Cubs need some depth at catcher, guess what? Bryce Wyndham is right there. It's kind of the role that PJ Higgins has carved out the last few years in Chicago in the Cubs organization. He needs to work on throwing guys out a little bit better. I'd love to see that improve. But like pitchers love throwing to him. He's got the athleticism. He's got the ability to play other positions besides catcher, which I think is huge too, right? So if the Cubs do want to go the 3 catcher route, which they've gone a lot with over the past 8 years now, Bryce Wyndham is a perfect example of a third catcher where like he can give somebody a break behind the plate, but also if somehow you wind up in a situation where he needs to play first or third base, second base, whatever it might be, he's not going to look like a fool out there, you know? So Bryce Wyndham just feels like a guy that he's just not going to be on top prospect. Like, he's not going to be on my top 40. He's not going to be on my top 50, but he is that guy that he's close to Chicago already, and he plays a position that is important for depth. And right there is a reason why you might see him in Chicago one day.
It's a great pick. He had the offensive season that is like exactly showcasing his strengths and who he is as a hitter. It was very impressive.
All right, guys, we got some superlatives left to do. We've got a few of them here. We'll go a little bit quicker because they're pitches, their skills. We don't need to go into a whole lot of detail about them. We'll start off with the pitchers, and we'll start with the best fastball in the system. Bryan, I'll start with you here.
Okay.
This is weird because this is a in past years, I think there's been pretty clear-cut answers here, especially with Daniel Palencia in the system. Last year, I think he probably took home the award last year, but there's been more clear-cut answers in the past. There is not as much this year. Part of that is because velo has gone up in the entire organization, but part of it is also because there's not a guy with that grade A, like 70, 80 grade fastball, in my opinion.
I'll go with Michael Arias because it was 100 miles per hour out of a basically sidearm slot. So, the vertical approach angle is going to be off the charts. I don't love that answer. But in lieu of a better one, I'll go with him.
Zumach?
Yeah, in the interest of kind of doing this a little bit more rapid fire, I'll actually go Jackson Ferris on this one. I think the upside is really, really high.
I'll go with Eduardo Nunez with the fastball here.
Nice.
It's a fastball touching triple digits sometimes, but it's got that bowling ball sinker at 98. Like I'll take that. That's a good fastball in my opinion.
It's nasty.
Best breaking ball in the organization. Bryan, I'll kick it to you again first. I'm picking on you.
Ben Brown curveball. Throws one of the most unique pitches in baseball, 87 mile per hour curveball that gets insane swing and miss rates.
Zumach?
Yeah, I think it's Brown. I like Horton's slider, but Brown's curveball is just such a nasty pitch.
Clean sweep, Ben Brown breaking ball. I've just been calling it a breaking ball because it's that slurve. It's a curve slider. It is a curveball. It is, but it's just that pitch that is not only good, it is unique, and that feels really important to me. So we'll round out the pitches here with maybe the most difficult one because the Cubs have been so good about having good changeups in the organization. Bryan, who you got for best change?
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Wicks against the Pittsburgh Pirates, absolutely absurd, performance at the highest level. I think he definitely like took back the superlative there.
I'm so glad you mentioned Wicks because I completely blanked on him, and I'm trying to like run through 4 other guys who I thought had really good curve or changeups. But it's Jordan Wicks. I mean, he's got a double plus changeup. It's just hard to go anywhere other than that.
Michael Arias has a great changeup. Cole Franklin obviously has a great changeup. There's a lot of good changeups. Jordan Wicks is the answer here.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me that changeup is, we talk about stuff plus in at the major league level and now at the AAA level. Changeup is just so hard to define under those stuff plus metrics. But he's just, all you got to do is watch an outing, and it's damn good. The changeup is great with Jordan Wicks. All right, most power. You can view this as raw power, game power, not yet tapped into. However you want to view it. Brian, we'll stick with the same order. Who you got?
Yeah, most raw power, Owen Casey. Most game power, Matt Mervis. I think it's easy to pick on Matt, but and I think there were large parts of the season where he wasn't power focused. I think when he's power focused, he's got it as much as anyone.
Yeah, I'd actually say almost the exact same thing. I was immediately leaning towards Casey. I certainly stick with that. I think that we see next year a renewed interest of power extension, driving through the ball, really crushing it next season. I think he's going to make some folks look silly.
Give me Owen Casey. Honorable mentions to Kevin Alcantara and to Felix Stevens. Who's got some real pop. So
that's a good one. If Hayden McGeary ever elevates the ball,
yep, you're absolutely right.
It'd be insane.
Absolutely right. Brian, best feel to hit.
I desperately want to give BJ Murray an award in this episode because BJ Murray was among my most favorite players to watch this year, and he hasn't been mentioned once yet. Just takes incredible at bats, swings at the right pitches all the time. I'm going to go with him.
Zumach?
I can't do the whole show without mentioning him. I'll mention Triantos. I think that he does have a really exceptional feel to hit. I almost went with Ballesteros, but if we are talking just pure contact ability, and honestly, it's still pretty close, I'm going to go with James.
I think he had a 50 plate appearance stretch where he didn't strike out in high A this year. I mean, just absurd.
Yeah. Just really.
I'm going Matt Shaw. I've got Matt Shaw here.
Okay.
I just think his hit tool is James Triantos. If I can't argue that at all, at all. But I'm glad you mentioned him. I'm glad you mentioned Ballesteros. Matt Shaw is my pick for best field to hit.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Fastest runner, Brian.
Pete Crow-Armstrong, stateside, organization-wide, there's a guy named Urban Jacques. I don't know exactly if I have that pronunciation right, but he is the fastest guy in the organization.
Zumach?
That's fantastic. Of course, you've got somebody that we're all digging deep on. Yeah, I mean, is PCA. I think that he's just unbelievable. That boy fast. He's just going to be doing some pretty silly things on the bases in the majors next year.
PCA is the fastest. I want to give a shout out to Bradley Beasley because this year he stole 30 bases, only got thrown out twice all year long. That is a good ratio right there. So if this may have been a best base runner, I probably go Bradley Beasley over PCA. I think that PCA is the most aggressive and the fastest, but I think Brad Beasley is the best base runner.
And maybe that's Beasley's future, like carved out a role, right? Like every few years, there's a guy like a Quentin Berry, Terrence Gore that, and they certainly had a bunch of speed as well, but they were just exceptional base runners, and they forced the issue onto the major league level when it actually matters the most.
Also, that was a skill that Christian Hernandez was awesome at this year. And I think people say a lot of negative things about Christian's year. If we're talking this category, like props to him, 27 steals, 32 tries.
Yeah, that was, I noticed that.
Also major props to Kevin Graber, sorry, who was really one of the big individuals coaches to help develop these guys with those skills.
Final category, final superlative, final award we're handing out today, and that is best defense. Honestly, let's. I'm gonna even break this up. We're gonna hand out two. We're gonna go best outfield defense, best infield
Okay.
defense. That way we can both answer with the way that we can give both answers that we want to. So Brian, what you got?
Yeah, I mean, best outfield defense is Pete Crow-Armstrong. I actually think he was slightly better defensively in 2022 than 2023, but I think a lot of times that just happens to do with like the balls that are hit your direction and how hard they are to catch. But I mean, he's just absurd. He's gonna win 10 Gold Gloves. Best infield defense, I think Luis Vasquez. I'm gonna say footwork's incredible, arm strength plenty for shortstop. He's my pick.
Yep, that's exactly who I had. I think you just can't. I mean, I've seen both of them make very strong plays in person that I just like went, wow. And we can't, hand wave away how important that could be either to the Cubs or to another major league club very, very soon. And I'm talking about Luis Vasquez with the other club said, we don't need to start anything with PCA there.
Yeah. The answers are PCA and Luis Vasquez.
There we go.
I would have put some considerable thought into giving Luis Vasquez this award if it was just one, no outfield infield. And part of that is because I think obviously PCA gets recognized because he's a top prospect, like the award show today, right? For on MLB Network, PCA was awarded best defender in minor league baseball. Totally fair, totally warranted. Luis Vasquez wasn't up for it because he's not a top 100 prospect. He's not a top he's not a top prospect. So
right.
Luis Vasquez deserves that love, just like a lot of guys in the organization in past years that are no longer in the Cubs organization were really strong defenders. And sometimes you just got to hit to be recognized for that defense. And this year, Luis Vasquez did, and the people recognize the defense a little bit more, So that's all I've got, guys. I've got that. We just went through 18 different awards, and it was a blast.
It was a blast.
So this is our last show of this first season. I haven't talked with you guys off air about it, but my assumption here is that we are going to be going every other week. We're going to tone down the shows. I just honestly, I can't keep up with doing them every week. It's a lot. It's a lot to do throughout the regular season, but we have a lot to talk about during the regular season. During the off season, there's less to talk about, so we can afford to go down to every other week. Guys, what was your favorite part about this first season of doing Cubs on Deck? Brian, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I loved having an outlet for just like to explore just the nerdiest part of following this. It's always fun to like go other places and talk about the top prospects, but to have a home where we can go deep into what Zach Lee's last 2 weeks have looked like is, I mean, that's the kind of place I belong in the conversations that I like to have with this insane fandom that the three of us share.
Yeah, man. Zumach, what you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I was going with that too. That's always just been, this is how I've gravitated towards baseball. It wasn't as much about what was happening at the major leagues. And obviously that matters, right? But it was like what some guys doing in high A and what that means down the line. And that's just always been how I've connected with the game. And so to be able to, for better or worse, depending on how the audience feels, for us to be kind of on here every couple weeks, just kind of kicking it, talking about just some deep level prospects. I mean, I loved it. And I did love covering the draft. I thought we had a really, really fun draft this year. So, that's my thing. But to be able to cover that and then to see those guys really make an impact was very fun.
Yeah, I think you guys nailed it. I mean, like I'm not writing about a lot of these guys that we talk about on the show because we have an hour every week to be able to dig in to whatever we want to dig into, whether it's some random topic that Brian, you came up with for a show, or we've got nothing to necessarily talk on that week. So let's just start running through players. I love that. That's my favorite. That's why this recording these shows are my favorite thing to do in terms of Cubs prospect content, right? I enjoy writing. I enjoy making the prospect lists. I enjoy doing all that. But man, like doing these shows it's a blast. I absolutely love doing it. So thank you to you guys for hopping on as much as you guys did throughout the year. Big shout out to the broadcasters that came on, to Sam and to BK and to Max and to Alex, because They were always just every time I asked them to come on the show, they were more than willing to come on, more than willing to kind of alter their schedules in a crazy, crazy busy minor league schedule, obviously. More than willing to come on the show, and I appreciate that more than anything. So thank you to those guys. Thank you to you guys, the listeners, for tuning in with us every single week throughout this season and watching this show grow from literally zero about this time last year to having the YouTube and the podcast following that we do. We can't thank you guys enough for listening every single week. It's been so much fun, and honestly interacting with you guys on social media, whether it's the 1060 West Discord, the Twitter, the Instagram, following us on YouTube and commenting and subscribing, all that stuff, man. Like it's sweet. It's awesome. I love it. I love those interactions, like you guys said. So you guys want to plug yourself one last time during this regular season, Bryan?
Yeah, at Cub Prospects on Twitter. I guess I'm gonna tout that I have an important piece coming at Bleacher Nation on Friday, so I hope you guys check that out. Yeah, it was a blast this year. Thanks, Greg, for having me on.
Yeah, likewise. At Ivy Futures, you can find me on Twitter. We do a lot, Bryan and I and Greg on the 1060 West Discord. Just a lot of fun talking baseball, and I'd echo that, Greg. Thanks so much for really captaining this and letting us just kind of come on and jump on when we could.
All right, guys, that's all we got for this regular season. We'll be back throughout the off season every other week or so. In the meantime, I might try to put out some videos on the Northside Bound YouTube feed, some shorter videos about some players. I'm thinking about trying to get into those shorter videos. You can find me on Twitter at Out of the Vines. You can find the podcast on anywhere where you listen to podcasts, on Instagram at Cubs on Deck. And in the meantime, we will be back in your ears in 2 short weeks. Thank you guys so much.
Go Cubs.